I'm really appreciate you watch my videos. I'm painting Rex and today me with my fearsome assistant, Hamster. Continue painting Sisters of Silence and I hope this video is useful for you. We'll start with capes and hair. As far as you can see here, we have two types of capes, fur and texture. We use wet palette because this time we paint our miniatures with brushes. We mix 50% of Incubi darkness and 50% of black-red Vallejo paint. That is how we apply shadow effects on hair and capes. Wet palette is useful to create nice gradient effect on objects. Because paint stays wet for a long time on it. We dry brush our capes and hair with Citadel's Mephiston Red. Its bloody red is gorgeous and can be well combined with golden armor. Now we paint our loincloth using the wet palette too. We paint it from down to up. First, we gently apply the thin layers of Incubi darkness on deep, shadow parts, and lower part of texture. Then, we paint the upper part and projecting parts with black-red. And now we create a gradient. So, we mix Incubi darkness and black-red paints on wet palette. Then, we use the mixture we got to shade it between painted dark and red layers with tiny strikes. Move on to the next step. Add a small amount of Mephiston red on wet palette. Mix it slightly with black red and paint the upper part of projecting parts with the tiny strikes of paint. That is how we make our highlighted areas pop out and the cloth more textured. Time to do our deeper parts of red objects darker. Mix 3 drops of Citadel's Drakenhof Nightshade and 1 drop of Vermilion Medium on wet palette. Mix well and paint deep areas gently. Now to the inner part of capes. We painted it with airbrush in the previous video. And now, we will paint the parts we haven't painted with mixture of 50% of Incubi darkness and 50% of any deep black we have and 1 drop of water. Then, we should let our capes dry up a bit. Time to paint the hilt. And again, we use our wet palette with wet paint on it. First, we cover out with Incubi darkness completely. Second, paint the parts we need to highlight a bit with black red. And then, we carefully paint the edges with Mephiston red. Moving to the next step, painting gemstones. First, we are shading them completely with Incubi darkness. Then, we apply the Mephiston red on convex areas. Let them dry up and get to the next step. We are going to make our armor more colorful. The knee parts are huge and plain, and we will transform them into gemstones. At first, we paint this blank lower part with black red. Then, we frame it with Vallejo Royal purple to complement the purple lightning base. And at last, we apply Mephiston red to create highlights. We are back to the capes and hair. Now that they are completely dry, we can make more highlights with Citadel's White Rider Red. So, we dry brush edges and convex areas. Some of our miniatures differ from the others. They have Pteruges and fur capes. We are making the fur more distinct. We start with mixing 3 drops of Citadel's Drakenhof Nightshade and 1 drop of Lemon Medium on wet palette. Then, we apply this mix onto the capes and Pteruges Now we set it aside to let them dry up and go back to the capes meanwhile. What we have here is embroidery that literally begs for a touch of gold paint. So, we'll start with the Retributor armor. Now our fur capes and Pteruges are all dried up, and we can continue painting them. We'll start with capes, dry brushing them with Mephiston red. Now it's time to add a touch of wild rider red to lighten up some parts. We also use Mephiston red to paint edges on Pteruges. Then, we apply additional highlights with wild rider red on fur and the parts of coat that need to be more defined in gentle strokes. We also use wild rider red to paint the most edged parts of Pteruges. The top of the hair, the most edged parts of Gemstones. Move on to the next step, painting the fur wraps. First, we cover them with incumbent darkness completely. Now, we mix 60% of Citadel's downstone and 40% of incumbent darkness on wet palette. Then, we gently cover the upper layer of the wraps with this mix. Let the wraps dry up a minute. And make a third step. Completely cover them with Drakenhof Nightshade. Now, let's wait till it dries up. And now we move on to one of the most important things, painting the skin and face. And according to the video, our wedges should be really pale. As far as we can remember, these are the human female models, so we have to create the appropriate skin tone with our paints. In this case, we should be very cautious with details, because a badly painted face can ruin the whole miniature, even if the rest is painted well. First, we cover the skin with Citadel's Bugman's Glow completely, but in a thin layer. Then, we give it some time to dry up. Next step, we mix 50% of Citadel's Kislev flesh and 50% of Vallejo pale flesh on wet palette and gently apply it on the heads, but this time we should not cover the deep parts with it. Now, we mix 70% of Kislev flesh and 30% of Bugman's Glow, and we apply the mix on the back of the heads and above the ears. Finally, we make highlights with pale flesh. We gently apply it on frontal lobes, eyebrow bones, temporal ridges, and orbital rims. Now, as a fifth step, we add depth to the eyes with Blood River flesh. Take any snow white paint we have and apply it on eye depths, leaving the shadow around them unpainted. Then, we take the deep black paint. In my case, it is Citadel's Abaddon black, and apply it only onto the upper part of eyeballs. That is how we make it seem like they look up. Now we are almost there. This is the time to create highlights and paint more details. Time to get back to our fur wraps. Now that they are completely dry, we can make highlights with downstone paint. We gently apply it on most visible parts. Now, our means are almost done and we can add a bit of color with white paint. We apply it on highlighted areas only. On some areas on the top of the hair. On the folds of capes. Slightly on the top of gems. And on the top edges on the knee parts gems. Then, we add more highlights on the armor. That is how we make it look closer to the art. We are using the latest metal cover chrome. It is very bright, but extremely liquid. So, you should shake well for a minute. We applied on the very edges of armor, edges of the blades, and clips. Now, as the minis are completely dry, we can paint parchments on purity seals and highlight the inner sides of the capes. First of all, we mix 70% of town sand and 30% of Incubate Darkness Citadel paints. And we fully cover the parchments with this paint. Then, we cover them with Dragonhof Nightshade. Let them dry up and paint convex areas with town sand. After that, we take Screaming Skull and apply it on the edges. Let our parchments dry up, and we are on to the inner side of the capes. We start with Incubate Darkness and apply it on them with the most thin strokes you can master. As we are done, we mix 50% of Incubate Darkness and 50% of Downstone and repeat it once again, but with the shorter strokes. And now we apply Downstone with the even shorter strokes. Our parchments are completely dry, and we can finally add thin lines that look like scribbles. Now this is the end of part 2. Now this is the end of part 2. I hope this video was helpful and you found something useful for you. In the next video we will create base with highlights effect. So see you next time.
Epilogue.
Incubate Darkness, Valley Black, one hamster, very important, and one drop of water. Hoppala.